we have duly ushered in the first stage of a remarkable project, the culmination of 3 years of planning to give New York and the whole American nation a great center of the performing arts, the like of which the world has never seen.
Everyone knows Lincoln Center. Whether it be a trip to the ballet, a night at the opera, or a visit to the symphony, New York City's Lincoln Center is a well-loved institution. But many don't know the history behind the center and have never considered what was lost for the sake of that upper-crust entertainment. It was only created through the demolition of San Juan Hill, the biggest black neighborhood in New York before Harlem. This trend of bulldozing minority neighborhoods to make way for so-called cultural landmarks didn't end with Lincoln Center. It is a pattern still seen today, like in Columbia University's new Manhattanville campus. The triumph of Lincoln Center is founded in its cultural impact on New York City, its success in rejuvenating a city struggling with white flight. The tragedy is the destruction of the existing neighborhood, San Juan Hill, and the disregard for the organic culture of the city. The center only accepted the culture if they were the ones executing it. Hiring a black principal dancer was progressive, but only on their stage and only performing their ballet. The destruction of San Juan Hill was in fact part of a larger nationwide trend, one pioneered by the now infamous Robert Moses. In 1949, President Truman passed the Housing Act. With World War II won, the country could finally focus more on domestic investment. That was the purpose of the Housing Act, to allocate federal funding to urban renewal and slum clearance. The idea was, if you cleaned up the cities, the people would come back. Moses, New York's head urban planner, was the one who executed this policy. Managing projects like the Cross Bronx Expressway, Jones Beach, and Lincoln Center, his vision transformed the city, for better or for worse.
His philosophy was, you can't make an omelet without breaking eggs. He resented everybody who gave him a hard time that you don't destroy a neighborhood to build a highway.
Lincoln Center embodied this egg omelet philosophy. The omelet, a center that would unite New York's largest cultural institutions, the Metropolitan Opera, New York Philharmonic, Juilliard School, New York City Ballet, and New York City Opera. But the egg still needed to be cracked. In 1955, San Juan Hill was doomed to slum clearance. San Juan Hill occupied 18 city streets, from 59th to 65th Street. The Lincoln Square Renewal Project would clear 6 of these. Up to 5,000 tenants could fill 1 block of tenements, meaning the clearance of 6 blocks displaced upwards of 30,000 people. These people were African American, Irish, Greek, and Puerto Ricans, all people with a culture that contrasted heavily with the white Protestant standard. In fact, it's surprising just how well known some of the residents of San Juan Hill became. Take jazz musician Thelonious Monk, for example, who grew up in San Juan Hill during its prime. James Johnson was also from San Juan Hill, and he's the one who created iconic 1920s dances like the Charleston. The neighborhood was an artistic inspiration in itself. West Side Story, an acclaimed musical and film, was based off the neighborhood and filmed during its destruction. The film showcases the character of the neighborhood, one of community and neighbor-centric views.
People left their doors open, and I was in and out of everyone's apartment.
But the film also highlights some of the worst aspects of San Juan Hill, the rampant crime and tension between rivaling gangs. And this was true as well. San Juan Hill was in no way ideal. This wasn't just the fault of the residents, though.
The police are actually basically conspiring along with white reform organizations to not clean up black neighborhoods. That everybody kind of wants a playground, and because there are these stereotypes about African Americans, the police turn a blind eye, and in fact they do more than that. With vice in black neighborhoods, the police let it stay, and they take bribes to keep those places open.
The government was largely complicit in the creation of these slums. Not only was the police force completely unregulated, but so was the homeowners' loan corporation. And so redlining was born. This corporation, funded by the government, rated neighborhoods based on their crime, infrastructure, and most shockingly, race. These ratings were compiled into redlining maps and then used by the Federal Housing Association to determine who received and didn't receive loans. Residents in neighborhoods that received a D grade for hazardous, like San Juan Hill, would be consistently rejected for loans. Without this money, these residents were stuck in red line neighborhoods, slums they would eventually be punished for living in when they were destroyed. These crime-ridden streets were all that patrons like John Rockefeller, who funded the Lincoln Square project, saw, and so they decided to fix that, but not by using input from the existing community. They were the missionaries, and the people of San Juan Hill their converts, except these missionaries were spreading high-class arts. Advertisements with slogans such as "Great Theater, Great Music, and Great Fun" emphasized a change from the snobbery that had been the norm to a more open and interactive theater experience, and this was significant. Minorities started to see themselves more reflected on stage. The Met Opera's opening was sung by a black soprano, Leontine Price. In the early years of Lincoln Center, the first black principal dancer, Arthur Mitchell, performed. The outreach programs consisted of more than just a few minority performers. Less than a year after construction began, the center initiated its student program. They invested almost $4 million, half of which went to subsidized student tickets. By 1969, these $4 million had brought almost 4 million students. The center also curated almost 5,000 in-school performances. New York Times critic Clive Barnes called the initiative the most tremendous educational program in the arts the world has ever known. Outreach programs were about the adult viewers too. The Summer Out of Door Festival is a free month-long exhibition of artists rarely given such a platform. The performances had jazz musicians, gospel singers, Moroccan dancers, and street theater. Lincoln Center's newsletters advertised the festival as more than entertainment, it's a public service. Despite these game-changing programs, there was still clearly a disconnect between the elite backing of the institution and new audiences they were trying to attract. The same newsletter that emphasized the need for entertainment-based public service also boasted about the supposed cheap ticket prices for the rest of their shows, saying 35% of tickets sold in the early years were $5 or less. However, $5 in the 60s actually had the buying power of $42, not something many can throw away on an opera show. And although the center aimed for more diversity on stage, it was only in forms they approved of. The culture that had existed in the neighborhood before the center, such as jazz music, was only accepted when it was in high-class arenas, such as Lincoln Center's stage. This stigma lingers to this day. Jazz finally received its own dedicated building in 2004, but today it is far from the jazz nurtured in clubs during the Harlem Renaissance. What's more, the poor residents of the community around Lincoln Center, who the center was meant to help, knew very little of these initiatives and benefited minimally.
It was destructive. It was very painful for all of them because, again, we were all very close.
The best representation of this disconnect can be seen in the architecture of the center itself. Called a White Palace on a Hill by artistic director Jane Moss, these palace doors were not open to everyone. The center was distanced from the city with 8 rows of traffic, one specifically for taxis and chauffeured cars. It was a pedestrian island in a sea of cars, prioritizing access to the center for wealthier suburbanites. For a time, the Met even insisted on allowing cars onto the main plaza so patrons could attend the shows without so much as even touching the sidewalks. Perhaps most revealing, the complex included a high wall towards Amsterdam Avenue, where the Amsterdam projects were located, blocking out an important sector of the community. Though today many New Yorkers don't know the story of San Juan Hill, what happened with Lincoln Center is in no way an outlier. The process of kicking out members of a historic and low-income community under the guise of cultural compensation is too often employed. Most recently in the expansion of Columbia University into Manhattanville, West Harlem. Just like San Juan Hill, West Harlem is a majority African-American neighborhood in danger of being completely erased thanks to the expansion of an elite white institution. The Manhattanville campus construction is estimated to displace 5,000 people, mostly African Americans. Columbia only enrolls about 2,000 African American students. In other words, Columbia is displacing more African Americans than it is enrolling. The extensive impact Lincoln Center has had on New York cannot be denied. For the time period, to have an institution directly marketing to minority and lower income groups, like with subsidized tickets, was a triumph. It represented an effort to make music and theater more accessible to everyone. The most obvious tragedy here is the destruction of San Juan Hill and the displaced residents, and 40,000 displaced people cannot be overlooked. But the more pervasive tragedy, the one that still echoes to this day, is the cultural superiority that Lincoln Center reeks of. Looking forward, a balance is necessary between cultural institutions and the pre-existing culture of the city.